Congressman Jim Renacci joins me now. He's a congressman from the 16th District, a freshman Republican running for a second term against an incumbent, one of only two races across the country in which incumbents are pitted against each other. Betty Sutton is your opponent, and good morning to you, Jim Renacci.
Good morning, Mike. How are you?
Very good. Good to have you this morning, and really good time having both of you at the debate at the City Club as well. I thought that was an enlightening experience. I wanted to delve into that a little bit more. I think folks did listen on our air and a number of other media outlets to hear the kind of conversation that you were having at the debate. So I wanted to get a little bit deeper. When you gave an introduction of yourself there, you talked about your background, and I don't know if we know enough about that, and in a minute I don't know if people got enough of that. So tell me a little bit about what formulates your politics. What's your upbringing that makes you the type of politician that you are and the type of legislator that you are today?
Well, Mike, that's a great question. I think a lot of people have to get to know the candidates, and if they get to know me, they'll realize that Jim Renacci came from a blue-collar union family in western Pennsylvania. My grandfather was a coal miner. My father was a railroad worker. My mother was a nurse. My uncles all worked in the steel mills. So that was kind of the setting that I grew up in, and as I've always been very proud of, that blue-collar background. You know, the one thing my dad and mother taught me in this country was that there's always opportunity, and you always have to keep looking for that opportunity, and if you work hard and you know, do the right things, a lot of good things can happen in America. So that's started my life in that background. My dad lost his job when I was 8 years old, and you know, we had to, of course, my mother was working, and we lived on that salary. She worked evenings, and it was a learning experience when you sit around the table and you realize that, you know, you have to make sure that you can live within your budget and live within the constraints of what you're bringing in. So again, another good solid background that I brought with me. I was the first person to go to college, paid for my own degree by working as a truck driver. I worked in an automobile dealership as a body shop person, loaded trucks. I did a lot of these things, and these were this was the background, again, that got me started in my career, which eventually my degree was in business administration. I became a CPA, started working in Pittsburgh, and then ultimately took a job with a client that I had who offered me a job in Wadsworth, Ohio. That was 29 years ago. Soon to be 30. March, I think it'll be February 7th of next year, I'll have been in Ohio 30 years. And that was the basis of my beginning and my starts, those humble beginnings where you learn that you have to live within the dollars you make, but also that hardworking blue-collar union family.
Living within the dollars you make, not as difficult today. You are very successful and have had a very successful career. And some people are dinging you for that. You're seeing coverage about how you're in the upper echelon of those who are legislators and talking about your net worth being into the tens of millions of dollars. When people talk about that and say that when you're wealthy, you are out of touch then with perhaps many of the folks that you represent, how do you respond to that?
Well, again, I'm never going to make excuses for my success. I mean, that's one thing America offers us all, the opportunity to succeed with hard work. I started my first business with just a few $100s in the bank. I worked hard. I spent 60, 80 hours a week. And what I'm really proud of is I was able to build a business by doing everything that the president talks about, working hard, doing the right things, and making sure that you take care of people. And I'm very proud to say that I've always been able to give back. Many of the people that worked with me now own their own businesses. You know, you talk about giving back. I started my own CPA firm. That first person I hired now owns that CPA firm. I had a nursing home business, and some of the people that I employed now own nursing homes. I always wanted to give back, but at the same time, I was able to live the American dream, something I want to make sure our children and our grandchildren have the same opportunity. And I'm afraid today the direction we're going, especially the last 4 years, we're not going to give our children and grandchildren that same opportunity.
Your various businesses thrived throughout those 3 decades with different administrations in charge, different majorities in the various houses of the Congress. So why is it different today? Why is this particular president and this particular Congress, in your opinion, somehow anti-growth and anti-business?
face it, the growth of government over the last 4 years has exceeded a lot of expectations of business. It's grown so much that we don't have certainty and predictability anymore in the business world. I mean, we talk about growth in cost in healthcare. That's a great example. Yes, healthcare went up over the years that I employed people, but it was 7 to 8%, maybe 12%. I mean, if you got a 12 or 13% increase, that was unusual. What we've seen since the president passed Obamacare, as even he calls it now, is increases of 62%, 42%. No certainty, no predictability. We have regulation on top of regulation that brings no certainty and predictability. We have government infringing in a lot of things we do, and one of the things that government got involved with even took my car dealership away from me. And those are the kind of things that I think government overreaches, and let's face it, when they get involved, many times they don't do the right things. It's the American person, the American dream, the American businessman that can help create jobs. We got to make sure that government is not infringing on that ability for them to do it.
You've made mention of a proposal where regulations would not kick in unless unemployment goes below 6%. It made me think, recently we've been seeing, as one example, folks who are getting sick from an injection of steroids, and some criticism, maybe there's not enough regulation of the types of compound pharmacies that make that. You'd look at that and say, perhaps that's something that needs to go on the fast track, but under your policy, would you have to wait until unemployment went down below a certain level before you instituted a regulation on a business like that?
Well, I think if you look at that regulation, if you took at that legislation, you would see that it took into some of those considerations. It was talking about overburdensome regulations, ones that cost the economy over $100 million. So there was some detailed specifics to that. But it was a good regulation because it said, look, if you're going to increase, we shouldn't be able to increase those type of regulations until such time as unemployment goes below 6%.
Let me ask you about Betty Sutton's program, Cash for Clunkers, that she's brought up at the debate and at various campaign stops. She's very proud of that legislation and talks about how it did a great job for spurring car sales. At your recent debate, you brought some facts and figures that refuted that, and you actually claim that the Cash for Clunkers made it worse for car dealers. Tell me a little bit about why you make that contention.
Well, again, here's an example of where what career politicians make rules that they don't have to live within, and then I'm someone who comes to the table and had to live with it. Cash for Clunkers was a disaster for the American working poor, the person who has to go buy a used car, and now they have to pay 9, 10, 11%. And these are facts that you can look up and find on the internet, the expense that they now have to pay, the dollars they have to pay. But the other problem with Cash for Clunkers is that as a dealer, somebody who sold those cars, and again, people say, well, you took advantage of the program. No, I took advantage of making sure that my customers would come in and say, I have this car. It meets the program. You have to take care of your customers. But at the same time, there are some that say the cost of that car to the government was anywhere from $5,000 to $24,000 per car. I don't have the specifics on that, but I read enough about it to follow through on that. That's one thing. The other problem that clearly occurred was we did pull car sales forward. There's no doubt. I think in the month of August, during that period of time when Cash for Clunkers was in the 6 counties that I now represent, new car vehicles sales went up to like 7,100 for that 1 month. The problem is months after that, it were as low as 3,100 and 2,900. And those are the problems. We pulled sales ahead, but then all of a sudden as a car dealer for the next 6 months, and it's not just my dealership, this was dealerships across the country. For the next 6 months, new car sales fell. The other problem, 52% of the cars, 53% of the cars were foreign automobile dealers. Now that's an issue that my opponent always talks about, sending jobs overseas. Well, she was sending dollars overseas because of those vehicles that were sold. But, when you have cost to taxpayers of $24,000 a car, total of $3 billion of a bill to the taxpayer. These are issues, but the worst issue, and it's still going on today, is that 9 to 11% increase in costs to the working poor. And at the same time, and I had facts at the debate, the Department of Labor reported there was, and I don't have the sheet with me, it was either 12 or 15,000 jobs that were lost in automobile manufacturing and auto parts manufacturing in the month of August, which was the second month of Cash for Clunkers. And that didn't include the 12 or 14,000 jobs that were lost in dealerships during that same period. So it's very hard to say that that program worked when you really put the facts and statistics out there.
Why then did Betty Sutton, as she did bring up at the debate, receive awards from a number of automobile sales organizations, including the one to which you're a member?
Well, again, I'm not sure what awards she was talking about, and I've never really gone back to look back at awards. It's always great to talk about awards. I always like to talk about facts, and the facts really can be delved into and shown that this didn't work. You know, a lot of times people who don't have records to run on talk about, you know, their awards and all these things, or they talk about Republicans and Democrats. They talk about the other side. I don't care what Republicans or Democrats did in the past. I want to make sure that what we do is right going forward, and if that means it's different than what a Republican side a year ago or 2 years ago, or an award that was given out 2 years or three, I want to look at facts, and I want to make my decision based on facts.
Betty Sutton accuses you of supporting policies that allow jobs to be shipped overseas. You seem to then make the same claim against her. How do you defend yourself against her accusations against you?
Well, I'm not sure if I made that accusation against her. I know you just mentioned that. I mean, she just clearly wants to make the accusation against me. But, you know, when somebody doesn't have a record to run on, they want to make accusations about the other side. I'm a CPA. I don't know what policy she's talking about. And I think she mentioned tax credits. It's a debate. I've never seen a tax credit that sends jobs overseas. I'd love for her to talk about that and explain what she's talking about. I think she, in some cases, wants to refer to a repatriation bill that my bipartisan group has put out there. But that repatriation bill, you know what that does? That brings dollars back from overseas. Companies that are in the United States that are doing business overseas can bring dollars back tax-free if, and only if, they put it back into American payroll, or new construction or plant, property, and equipment. And even that was co-sponsored by Peter Welch, he's a member of the House Progressive Caucus. So clearly this is a good jobs bill for America. It has nothing to do with sending jobs overseas.
Along the lines of the role of the federal government in sparking job creation and goosing the economy, I wonder if you think any stimulus programs have ever worked. You can go all the way back to the WPA. There's stimulus under George W. Bush as well. And you talk about being opposed to stimulus, particularly under the stimulus under President Obama. But is there any stimulus that works that allows government to leverage its spending to create jobs and prosperity?
Well, the problem today, Mike, is that the government is broke. We are spending dollars we don't have. We're borrowing money from China. If we're going to stimulate the economy, we need to do things like my repatriation bill, which brings dollars back from businesses and puts that as stimulus. Doesn't cost the government a dime. Those are the kind of stimuluses. We cannot continue down a path of spending money we don't have and mortgaging our children and grandchildren's future. It's just not the direction we should be taking.
Money that was spent for the bailout of the banks has all been paid back, every penny plus interest. And I wonder then if that's an example of where the government can step in, or do you think the risk was not worth it?
Well, again, I don't think we should be bound. The Wall Street banks, those banks did things that put our economy in the wrong place in 2007, 2008. And anybody at Wall Street that did those things should be, you know, especially if they did things illegally, they should be persecuted. You know, the law we should follow through on those people. But we shouldn't be bailing out banks. We shouldn't be picking winners and losers. We should be moving forward and letting the system work. And that's what my opponent bailed out the Wall Street banks, and then she turns around and she complains about Wall Street, and then in turn she passes the Dodd-Frank bill, which now sets up 5 banks to be too big to fail, which means that the government will bail them out again if there's a problem.
It's time for a break. You're listening to The Sound of Ideas. I'm Mike McIntyre. When we return, we'll ask Jim Renacci about his views on natural gas extraction and waste disposal in Ohio, and about the prospects for bipartisanship in the nation's capital. Stay tuned. I'll ask you about a topic that I wish we could have covered at your debate at the City Club, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to ask about now, and that is about energy exploration. You've mentioned a number of times about how the search for natural gas and the extraction of natural gas in Ohio is really saving the economy here. A lot of people very concerned about the environment as it relates to extracting gas through the fracking process, and then what to do with the water that's left over, the contaminated water that's also, by the way, coming in from other states and being put into injection wells in Ohio. So what about your thoughts on being able to frack safely and the future of natural gas in Ohio?
Well, first off, I would tell you that I think we have to make sure whatever we do when it comes to fracking is done environmentally safe. That's number one. And the Ohio Department of Natural Resources is becoming the other states are looking to the guidelines that they're putting in place. I think that's so important. We've got to make sure that's environmentally safe. But at the same time, we have to be able to use the resources that we have underground. And that's why I said it's amazing what has happened in Ohio. And I realize that, that's not the only place that we're seeing some movement in manufacturing. But let's face it, in Ohio, what we're seeing in the oil and gas exploration is definitely driving the unemployment numbers down. It's affecting jobs and everything from not only the oil and gas directly, but I even talked about people who, when you think of campers and the RV business. And I talked to an RV company who says their business now is booming because they're able to use, because of all the people coming in, they're selling more and more RVs.
I wonder if you're mentioning the idea of making sure that it's totally environmentally safe to get at this gas and to dispose of the water that's left over afterward. What about your policy, your idea that you mentioned at the Jefferson Action Forum to cut the Environmental Protection Agency by 30%? I wonder if cutting agencies like that, in your opinion, somehow might make it more difficult to make sure that these processes are done safely.
Well, think of that, Mike. We're talking about cutting the EPA, the federal EPA, by 30%. But you also heard what I just said earlier. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources is doing a phenomenal job, and Ohio already has the Ohio EPA. We don't need regulation on top of regulation on top of regulation. Our cuts were 30% to the federal EPA. We can do a lot of this better at the state level, and that's what we should be doing.
Is Washington, in your opinion, now that you've been there for a term, is it broken? Washington
is absolutely broken. I mean, it is. It goes from things like not starting on time. I mean, I chuckle. Everybody always says to me, "What have you learned about Washington?" Number one, nothing starts on time, and that's a problem. Can you imagine in business if things didn't start on time? So number one, that's an issue. Number two, we hear about debts and deficits, but when you really start looking at the numbers, Washington doesn't even have a balance sheet. Washington doesn't even have the ability to track travel expenses. I've been waiting over 20 months to get travel expenses. That's a problem. I'm trying to represent the people of the United States, and I cannot detail out what our travel expenses are by a division of the United States government. And third, it's so political. Now, I think I've been able to break through the politics by forming this bipartisan group. I'm very proud of that. John Carney and I were able to do that 3 months after I got involved in Washington. We're now up to 16 people, 8 Republicans, 8 Democrats. We have an outside think tank that's going to be working with us in the future. I'd love to see that group grow to 30, 40, 50 people. That's how we're going to fix Washington, by working together in a bipartisan fashion.
The group now is 16 people, and I wonder, do you think that you can actually fix Washington with this bipartisanship? Would it necessarily one day have to be one-party rule to actually one side gets through its ideas and then the nation flips again? How can you take 16 people in a bipartisan fashion and make that the model for the rest of Washington? How long would that take?
Well, look, I think everything takes time, but 16 is a good start. That group could have grown faster. I think we have to get We have to continue to grow it. We have to continue to work on a bipartisan basis. I think we have to continue to look at each other and pick, this is a good idea. Let's take what we can agree on. Let's move forward. Let's get things accomplished. Because let's face it, this is not about Republicans and Democrats. This is not about blue and red. This is about American problems, and we need American solutions, which means every once in a while, the other guy might have a good idea. And I'll be the first one to admit that. I can learn from the other side, as long as they're willing to look at me and say, maybe I can learn from him too.
Let's talk about the TV ads we've been seeing in the district, and when you're here, you, I'm sure, see them as well. They're coming in not just from your own campaign and from Betty Sutton's campaign, but from outside interests on both sides. Millions and millions of dollars, pretty unpalatable types of ads as well. I wondered if you stand by the ads that are being run on your behalf.
Well, quite frankly, Mike, I don't pay attention to the ads. I mean, I've gotten to be, just like many of the people in the district, ads are being run, both sides, presidential, Senate races. Most people are turning those off. I try and turn them off, too. I try and get out in the district. One of the things I'm very proud of over the last 22 months is I've been out over 150 visits, whether it's to businesses, whether it's to companies, whether it's to individual homes to meet with, neighborhoods. I've had town hall meetings where I've talked to people who agree with me and disagree with me. I think that's the way we need to be able to get our message out. Now, it's a shame because we have all this clutter, but I continue to run. When it comes to ads, I continue to run positive ads talking about the real issues. My personal ads are not slinging mud over TV. My personal ads are talking about me and what I believe in, and I'm going to continue to do that. And I think all the other ads that are running, I mean, I can't control them. And as I learned a long time ago, you can only be able to do what you can control, and I'm not going to try and talk up, I can't complain when I can't control it. So as most people in the district, and I've learned this every day, they're just tuning them out.
Do you, we talked about this a little bit before too, but the idea of a grand bargain, do you support a grand bargain on the budget, something that gets you together? And the idea of the term bargain is you've got to give some stuff up, and there's got to be some things that the other side gives up. And I'd like to get at the bedrock of what it is you have to have and what it is that you'll give up in order to reach a bargain on an actual budget going forward and not just another stopgap.
Well, it's interesting because when you talk about a grand bargain, it's got to be something that works. So we got to eliminate political rhetoric. The first thing we always hear is this political rhetoric. We have to raise taxes on the wealthy to pay their fair share. Well, think about what happens when you do that. You tax the job creators, and I know people hate to hear that, but that's the truth. You tax the job creators. Isn't it better to be competitive on a high-end rate when we know that we have the highest corporate tax rate and that we have over 50% of our businesses paying their business taxes on the personal level? We can't raise taxes and not be competitive. So when the highest tax rate is 25% and we're 35%, we have to be competitive. At the same time, how do you increase revenues? By eliminating loopholes. And that's the key. We don't have to raise taxes to increase revenues, but what we can do is eliminate loopholes.
So that's something you have to have, which is the idea that the upper levels don't get taxed more, which is something the Democrats want. What is something that you're willing to give?
Well, when it comes to what I'm willing to give, I want to be able to do whatever is necessary to make sure this economy grows. I'm worried about the 23 million people who are jobless or unemployed. We have to look at ways to bring certainty and predictability back to the marketplace. So, I'm willing to listen, but when you say what am I willing to give, I'm willing to do whatever necessary to make sure those 23 million people that are jobless, that we bring in jobs back. So I want to be able to listen. But, I want to hear somebody tell me this is what I believe will make that happen, and then, of course, I'd be willing to give.
Jim Renacci, thanks so much for making time for us this morning. We'll have Betty Sutton up next. Appreciate